Today we're going to talk about how fasting can help lower your cholesterol, which can lower your risk of heart disease, and it's coming right up. Cardiovascular disease, like heart attacks and strokes, have lots of different reversible risk factors, such as being overweight, having high blood pressure, and diabetes. Fasting can help with all of these, but in addition to that, it can also lower your cholesterol, which is also a risk factor. In animal studies, time-restricted eating, which is a form of short intermittent fasting, reverses many of these things, including the cholesterol. In human studies, however, a lot of them have looked at healthy people and not necessarily at people who have diagnosed metabolic syndrome and are therefore at high risk of cardiovascular disease. So we're going to look at this study today, which was recently published and looks specifically at those people who already have metabolic syndrome, and most of them are already on medications, and whether or not adding something such as time-restricted eating can amplify some of those benefits. So we know that the body follows a certain circadian rhythm, and what that means is that over the 24 hours of the day, the different systems of our body, such as the endocrine system, the autonomic nervous system, and our metabolic hormones, all change according to the time of the day and when we're eating. We also know that eating erratically can alter that circadian rhythm. People who do a lot of shift work, for example, can be put at risk because of this alteration of the circadian rhythm. But the other thing that's really changed is that eating for very extended periods of time might not allow our bodies to get back into this sort of natural rhythm. And animal studies, again, show that restricting these feeding periods can have tremendous benefits in terms of reducing the body weight, the blood glucose, but also the cholesterol and triglycerides, and also raises the lifespan, but also the health span. That is, these animals tend to live longer, but they also tend to be much healthier than than animals that are allowed to eat all the time. This is especially important because the way that we eat has changed dramatically since the 1970s. In the 1970s, the average person in America and Canada would eat, for example, at 8 o'clock in the morning breakfast and 6 o'clock dinner time. And there's no snacks in between and there's no snacks afterwards. So what that is 10 hours where you're eating in 14 hours when you're fasting. And this was considered a normal baseline. This was something that you just did day in, day out. There's a time that you eat and a time that you don't eat, which was the fasting period, which is why breakfast is called that, the meal that breaks your fast. However, more recent studies have shown that very few people actually follow this type of eating pattern. In fact, the eating window has gradually just ballooned from 10 hours, and now over 50% of people have a feeding window of over 15 hours. That is, they eat almost as soon as they get up, and they don't stop eating until they go to bed. 15 hours means that you're only spending about 9 hours not eating, of which about 8 of that might be spent in bed sleeping. So this is a dramatic change from the 1970s to today because we believe that eating small meals constantly, we believe that eating grazing, for example, is very healthy for us. But I'm not sure that's true, and this is a study that looks at that exact question. So what they did was they took people who ate for over 15 hours of the day and shortened that to a 10-hour window. And they called that time-restricted eating, which was a 14-hour fasting period. And they did that by delaying the time that you ate in the morning and sort of advancing the time that you ate at night. So eating a later breakfast and eating an earlier dinner, so you shrink the window, but not by necessarily skipping meals. The other thing they did was try to increase the regularity of the meal so that you ate at a specific time in the day. In essence, what they're trying to do is go back to that 1970s eating pattern. Many of these people were on medication. 79% were on a statin, which is for cholesterol, and 63% were on a blood pressure medication. And in this figure, it shows you exactly how they did it. These are individual participants, and you can see in the orange their baseline eating habits when they ate, and you can see it stretched out all throughout the day. And the blue is the eating pattern after they went on the study, and you can see that it's very much more consolidated. And what effect did that have on their metabolic parameters? There was no specific recommendation to decrease calories, but nevertheless, by simply consolidating your eating periods, the number of calories also dropped. It dropped by 8.6%, and anytime you can eat less by doing a simple intervention, you're probably going to end up a winner. And by doing this, they found several things. First of all, weight loss averaged 3.3 kilograms over the 3 months of the study. That's a 7.6 pound weight loss, which was controlled not by calories, but just by adjusting how often you eat and trying to eat regularly. And that weight loss translated into lower body fat and the more dangerous visceral fat by an average of 3%. They decreased their waist circumference, and somewhat of a surprise, they found that people had a significant improvement in restful sleep by 23%. That is, they felt much more rested after getting up in the morning. And that wasn't exactly expected, but if you're eating all the time, perhaps that may throw off the circadian rhythm of your natural hormones, many of them which alter with eating, and therefore perhaps that sleep might be improved by not eating so late at night. And that's a huge, huge thing, because disordered sleep is going to contribute heavily to stress and probably weight as well. So what about cholesterol? The total cholesterol decreased by 7%, and the LDL, which is one of the measures that people often look at in terms of considered high risk, the so-called bad cholesterol, although it's not a very accurate term, decreased by 11%. And this was despite the fact that almost 80% of these people were already on a medication called a statin. The expected decrease of cholesterol from the weight loss alone was only about 3%, so the fasting actually improved their cholesterol much, much more than expected for that weight loss. And this is not the first time that it was shown. Another study by Butani et al. Earlier showed that a more intensive form of fasting called alternate daily fasting, where you spend 1 day fasting and 1 day not fasting, lowered the cholesterol by about 25% and the dangerous triglycerides by 32%. So that's a very significant drop in cholesterol by fasting. And even the less intensive sort of 10-hour time-restricted eating did quite a bit of benefits. Not only that, but the blood pressure, which is a key component of cardiac health, something that doctors measure all the time, dropped by about 4%, which is almost the same effect that you would see if you were taking a blood pressure medication. And despite the fact that it was only a 3-month study, and with no instructions to continue it, when they contacted the patients after 16 months, the majority of them, over 60% of them, were still following time-restricted eating, either part-time or full-time, demonstrating that this is not only an effective intervention, but it can also be sustained for a long period of time, years, and in fact, over people's lives. So the important thing to understand here is that there's lots of different ways we can impact our health. But this very simple fix, just by consolidating the meals, can do two things. One, it can allow you to eat less, but it also allows you a framework where you can simply say, well, you know what? It's late. I shouldn't be eating. I won't be eating. So it's a very simple intervention. So really try to consider adding that into your regimen. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you learned something. If you did, you might consider having a look at some of these other videos on fasting that hopefully will help you. Share it with a friend maybe, and they may learn something too. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you next week.